Hello everyone, my name is Xue Hao. My English name is Alex, and now I live in China. I independently invented a new trade method, exchange trade, which will change the operating model of internet platforms and help us find the new growth points for the world economy. In addition, exchange trade can also improve commodity productivity and transaction quality help us delay economic recession and fight economic crises. The creation of exchange trade theory and the production of PPT teaching video are completely by me alone. However, due to my poor English, I did not display the video content directly, and the PPT explanation sound you heard later is done by computer software. There are two problems with my PPT presentation in English. The first problem, the video won't work well by doing this, because my English is not good. You might not be able to understand many of my presentation. The second question, doing this will take me a lot of time. Even introducing a issue of extreme trade requires me to spend a lot of time on speaking practice. Doing this caused me to take me more time to complete the video, and you understand that screen trade will also be delayed. Given the depending recession right now, I think we are running out of time. I think it will have been a better option to release screen trade earlier. So I chose to write the Chinese PPT and speech, then translate them in English with the help of Google Translator, and finally rely on Microsoft's AI voice software to record the English version of Alice Trade explanation video. Because of the theoretical construction of extreme trade, the writing of relay copywriting, the production of PPT, and the recording and editing of videos are all completed by me alone. So if there are some omissions in some tabs, please forgive me. Please don't miss my video because PPT is displayed by AI. And don't choose to close my video because the wrong words and grammar in the video. Because edge screen trade that invent is really important. It will not only help world to delay the economic recession, help many countries fight the economic crisis, but also help the fund hope when your career is not doing well. Now, let's get started with the body content of the X-green trade.
Hello everyone, my name is Xue Hao, and my English name is Alex. I independently invented a method to fight the economic crisis. Alex scoring trade. Please remember the name of this method, because it will be famous all over the world and completely change the world. This video is the fifth in the Alex scoring trade theory series. Why buyers lie in survey. Alex impossible triangle. In the last video, I analyzed the main 6 problems faced by the traditional after-sales survey system. Buyers refuse to conduct survey, buyers negatively conduct survey, interference from the brushing team, it is difficult to obtain the purchasing power of buyers, and the evaluation standards between buyers cannot be unified. The buyer intentionally provides false information in the survey. I have analyzed the first 5 questions in the last video, and today I will talk about the 6th question. Why buyers deliberately provide false information in survey. Many merchants who organize survey are rarely aware of a problem. Some buyers will provide false information in the survey for their own benefit. To understand this, we must first realize the fact that there is a natural conflict of profit between sellers and buyers. This conflict lies in the transaction price of goods. Do you remember what I said in the second video, fixed unit price trading and floating unit price trading? If the commodity is traded at a floating unit price, the seller and the buyer will compete for the commodity transaction price, and the buyer and the seller are in a state of confrontation. In a previous video, I also mentioned a concept called price discrimination. Here is the Wikipedia definition of price discrimination I quoted. Price discrimination, price discrimination, also known as differential pricing. Differential pricing, price differences, occurs when a monopoly charges some consumers more than others for the same item, or charges consumers who make small purchases prices are higher than consumers who buy in bulk. It is usually distinguished by characteristics such as customer objects and regions. Among the different types of price discrimination, there is one kind of price discrimination that will arouse extreme disgust among consumers. Under the condition that the producer can fully know the demand of the consumer, the producer sells according to the highest reserve price that the consumer is willing to pay per unit in order to exploit the pricing method of all the consumer surplus. Putting this in reality means that sellers are likely to squeeze out every penny a buyer might pay through a completely differentiating approach. And since completely differentiated pricing requires sellers to fully understand consumers' information, what actions would smart consumers take in survey under such circumstances? Yes, as I mentioned at the end of the last video, some buyers will deliberately provide false information in after-sales survey. How to explain this phenomenon? In this video, I will use my independently proposed Alex's impossible triangle to answer this question. In the current market, many businesses will collect information through survey and use this information as the basis for adjusting their business strategies. In this process, it is inevitable to collect information from consumers. At this time, accusation RECC, how can consumers honestly participate in the survey? My answer is that if there is an ongoing transaction between buyers and sellers, and both buyers and sellers are rational people, that is, sellers want to get the most out of the transaction, and buyers want to get the most out of the transaction, the buyer will know real information will be provided in after-sales survey. A rational person refers to a person engaged in economic activities. When he takes economic actions, his actions are all trying to obtain his own maximum economic profit. In other words, in an ongoing transaction, when both the buyer and the seller are rational persons, the seller's profit are maximized, the buyer's profit are maximized, and the buyer provides real information in the survey. The three cases are a triangle that cannot be achieved at the same time. In any case, this triangle can only achieve at most two of them, and I call this phenomenon the Alex's impossible triangle. For the convenience of understanding, I will first quote the famous Mendel's impossible triangle, triple paradox, about national monetary policy and economics. The following is Wikipedia's discussion of Mendel's impossible triangle.
Ternary paradox. The impossible trinity, also known as the impossible trilemma or the unholy trinity, is a concept in international economics which states that it is impossible to have all three of the following at the same time. 1. A fixed foreign exchange rate. 2. Free capital movement, absence of capital controls. 3. Monetary policy. Why it's not possible. 1. Free flow of capital and fixed exchange rate. Under the free entry and exit of capital and the fixed exchange rate, the government cannot fix the money supply nor the profit rate, so the flow of capital will make the profit rate tend to the international profit rate level and lose the autonomy of monetary policy. For example, Hong Kong allows free entry and exit of capital, and the Hong Kong dollar was pegged to the US dollar by the linked exchange rate system on October 17, 1983, so Hong Kong's monetary policy is completely dominated by the United States. 2. Free flow of capital and autonomous monetary policy. Under the free inflow and outflow of capital and an autonomous monetary policy, the capital flow caused by changes in profit rates will be offset by the reverse changes in the exchange rate, so that the inflow and outflow of capital will not affect the money supply. Therefore, the country can have monetary policy autonomy, but it cannot be fixed. Exchange rate. Most developed economies use this system, including the US dollar, the euro, and the Japanese yen. 3. Autonomous monetary policy and fixed exchange rate. In the above two cases, the capital flow causes the double rate to be controlled, and only one can be controlled, so after the capital flow is controlled, the double rate can be controlled. For example, after the Asian financial crisis, Malaysia adopted a financial lockup.
A similar phenomenon also exists in after-sales survey. If both the seller and the buyer are absolutely rational people, when the seller tries to ask the buyer for the after-sale feedback survey of the product, the following three situations cannot be completed at the same time. 1. sellers seek to maximize profits. 2. Buyers seek to maximize profits. 3. Buyers provide real information to sellers in survey. Why it's not possible. 1. When sellers seek profit maximization and buyers seek profit maximization. When sellers seek to maximize their profit, if buyers provide real information, sellers will use real information to increase prices and maximize the profit of sellers. At the same time, it will damage the profit of buyers. Therefore, in this case, it is impossible for buyers to provide real survey information. For example, a clothing manufacturer seeks to maximize profits in the transaction, and the clothing middlemen who buy clothing from it also seek to maximize profits. Under such circumstances, clothing intermediaries will realize a problem. If they provide real information to manufacturers, they will inevitably be used by manufacturers to quote the highest price they can accept, which is related to their own maximization of profit. Contrary to the goal of the clothing middlemen must provide false information in the survey so that their own profit are guaranteed. 2. When sellers pursue profit maximization and buyers provide sellers with real information. When the seller seeks to maximize the profit, if the buyer provides the seller with real information, the seller will use the real information to increase the price, and the buyer can no longer obtain the maximum benefit. Still using the example of clothing manufacturers and middlemen. If a clothing manufacturer seeks to maximize profits and wants to get real information about the clothing middlemen who buy from him. In this case, after obtaining the real information, the clothing manufacturer will inevitably use the real information obtained, and in the subsequent transactions, the middlemen who have always bought the goods will propose the highest price they can accept. This is obviously not in the profit of the clothing middlemen who buy the goods, so when the clothing middlemen provide survey information to the clothing manufacturers, it is equivalent to giving up their own maximize the profit. 3. When buyers seek to maximize profits and buyers provide sellers with real information.
When the buyer seeks to maximize the profit, if the buyer provides the seller with real information, the seller must be required to guarantee the voluntary transfer of profit to maximize the profit of the buyer as a guarantee for providing real information.
That is to say, if the buyer wants not to suffer losses, he must ensure that the seller cannot make a profit even if he obtains the real survey information, which is obviously contrary to the maximization of the seller's profit. Another example of clothing manufacturers and middlemen. If the clothing middleman seeks to maximize profits, it is necessary to provide real information to the manufacturer in the after-sales survey. In order to meet this situation, the clothing middleman must obtain the guarantee of the clothing manufacturers and will not use the real survey information obtained to maximize the profit of the clothing manufacturers themselves, but give priority to ensuring the maximization of the profit of the middleman. And if this is done, it will inevitably need to give up the maximization of the profit of clothing manufacturers. So what happens when you bring the Alex impossible triangle into real trading? In reality, most companies are pursuing profit maximization in transactions. As long as they can sell, they naturally hope that the higher the commodity price, the better. Most consumers are also pursuing profit maximization in transactions. As long as they can buy, it is natural to hope that the lower the commodity price, the better. When a consumer receives an after-sales survey of a certain product, if he is a rational person, he will inevitably realize that the survey company will use the information received to conduct price discrimination and harm the profits of consumers. If he buys this product again, he will likely to pay a higher price for this commodity, then he has no reason to give honest information in the survey. So if the company that issued the survey does not seek to maximize profits, but is willing to give up price discrimination and develop together with consumers, can it break the impossible triangle of Alex? My answer is that it is difficult. If you want consumers to fill in the survey questionnaire honestly, such an honest enterprise must distinguish itself from other enterprises in order to win the trust of consumers. However, due to information asymmetry, such a condition it is difficult to achieve in traditional trade. So the conclusion is obvious. As long as there are rational buyers in the after-sales survey, these rational buyers will definitely provide false information. To further test my point, I plan to divide the rational buyer group into rational short-term buyers and rational long-term buyers, and then analyze their strategies in traditional survey to see if they still meet this conclusion. It should be noted that rational short-term buyers are buyers who only make one transaction with the seller. A rational long-term buyer is a buyer who will make 2 or more transactions with the seller. Let's start with the question, what is the buyer's optimal situation when trading? At this time, someone will answer, it is very simple, the lower the transaction price when buying the same product, the better. But I don't think so. I think the situation is more complicated. The lowest price is not necessarily in the best profit of all buyers. For short-term buyers, buying at the lowest price the seller can afford is indeed the optimal strategy. But if the buyer needs to buy from the seller for a long time, the lowest price is no longer the best strategy for the buyer. Because when all buyers push the price to a minimum, sellers will likely exit the market because of too little profit, and buyers will not be able to buy the item at a low price. Therefore, for an independent long-term buyer A, the optimal strategy is actually that buyer A concludes the transaction at the lowest price that the seller can afford, and all buyers other than A can complete the transaction at the highest price that each buyer can accept. In this way, A can pay the least cost in the transaction, and because the high price paid by other buyers can ensure that the company earns enough profits, in this case, the company will continue to provide buyer A with a cheap source of goods. So we can see that the contradictions and games in economic activities not only exist between sellers and buyers, but also exist within the buyer group. Remember this, because this conclusion is very important. The game between buyers will help us create a new trading model. The analysis of the buyer's situation at the time of the transaction is over. Next, I will analyze the after-sales survey to see what best suits the profit of the buyers. I still divide the buyers into short-term buyers and long-term buyers. For short-term buyers, if the seller announces that there is a reward for participating in the survey, the buyer will first evaluate whether the value of the reward is higher than the value of the time and energy consumed by participating in the survey. If it is lower, the short-term buyer will refuse to participate in the survey. If it is higher, short-term buyers will participate, but sellers will not be able to get real information. The optimal strategy for short-term buyers at this time is not to fill in the after-sales feedback questionnaire seriously and honestly, but to provide the most perfunctory questionnaire with the goal of consuming the least time and energy. The specific performance may be that all true and false questions are selected yes, and all multiple-choice questions are selected A. This is why, in the last video, I did not encourage companies to give the same reward to every consumer who participated in the survey. Negative information provided by short-term buyers will pollute the survey results. Companies need to spend time and effort to distinguish such questionnaires in order to eliminate this effect, and the practice of setting equal rewards is completely worth the loss. The more frightening situation is that if short-term buyers take a random selection method to quickly fill out feedback questionnaires, it will make it more difficult for sellers to filter out such invalid questionnaires. Since sellers can't get useful information from short-term buyers, what about long-term buyers? We still assume that all sellers and buyers are rational people, and long-term buyers will not refuse to participate in after-sales feedback surveys compared to short-term buyers who choose to stay out of the way. Because long-term buyers need to pursue their best profit, it is necessary to deliberately provide false information in survey. Since the seller is an absolutely rational person, if the seller is told that buyer A has a strong dependence on the commodity, then the seller will inevitably price discriminate against A and offer a higher price when trading with A. Since buyer A is also an absolutely rational person, buyer A will realize this in advance, and then deliberately conceal his preferences in the after-sales feedback survey, showing a lower than actual product favorability. The seller's price discrimination strategy is obviously not just for buyer A, but applies to all buyers. The more the buyer depends on and likes the product, the higher the seller's offer will be. The less the buyer cares about the product and the less he likes it, the lower the seller's offer will be, and even if there is a profit, the seller is willing to make a deal. In such a situation, all long-term buyers will adopt the strategy of buyer A. At this point, it can be concluded that all long-term buyers will lie in the after-sales feedback survey and feedback product evaluation information to the seller that is worse than the actual situation. Don't consider the fact that the seller gives the same small reward to every buyer participating in the survey at this time, because long-term buyers who participate in the survey will lie regardless of whether the seller gives the reward or not. Finally, let's summarize. In the absence of rewards, the best strategy for short-term buyers is not to participate in the survey. In the case of rewards, the best strategy for short-term buyers is to participate in surveys, but feed back false information, and for long-term buyers, regardless of whether the seller provides incentives or not, the optimal strategy for long-term buyers is to provide false information in the survey, as shown in the following table. After dividing the buyer group into short-term buyers and long-term buyers, the results are consistent with the Alex impossible triangle phenomenon. If both buyers and sellers are rational people and are unwilling to give up seeking their own best profit, rational short-term buyers will either not participate in the survey or provide false information after participating in the survey. And rational long-term buyers provide false information all the time. Imagine if you were a manager conducting post-sales survey. When you receive 100 buyer after-sales survey questionnaires, there may be 10, 20, and 30 questionnaires whose contents must not be true. Many of these questionnaires come from rational buyers, and ultimately, these questionnaires will contaminate the entire survey information. The trouble is, since you can't tell which questionnaires belong to rational buyers, you can't eliminate these lying ones. You can't even predict how tainted the final message will be because you can't count the number of rational long-term buyers. Therefore, the conclusion is certain. In traditional survey, as long as the buyer is a rational person, it is impossible for buyers to provide real information in survey. What is even more frightening is that in traditional survey, it is difficult for sellers to filter out the survey information of rational buyers from all the information. This alone can judge the failure of traditional survey. This concludes the main content of this issue. The Alex impossible triangle was originally created by me to prove that in a free market economy, when buyers are rational people, the traditional survey model will inevitably fail. At the end of the video, I still want to make a summary of the content of this issue. In this video, I put forward a point that some buyers will deliberately provide false information in after-sales feedback, and the reason for this phenomenon is that there is a natural conflict between sellers and buyers in the transaction. This contradiction constitutes the Alex impossible triangle. When both the seller and the buyer are rational persons, the seller seeks to maximize the profit, the buyer seeks to maximize the profit, and the buyer provides the seller with real information in the survey. These three requirements are a triangle that cannot be completed at the same time. Due to the characteristics of the free market, there are always sellers who adopt price discrimination strategies for higher profits, and buyers cannot give up their own profit, which makes it inevitable for rational buyers to lie in survey. And because in the traditional survey mode, the seller cannot distinguish the lying rational buyer information from the survey information, so the traditional survey results must be distorted. In this video, I demonstrated that traditional survey is destined to fail to collect real information about rational buyers, so what about other buyer information collected by traditional survey? In the next video, I will analyze the strategies adopted by irrational buyers and click farms in traditional after-sales survey. See you in the next video.